Hey everybody, I'm Bill. I'm an alcoholic. Good to be in Tennessee. Um, I think Zoom has given the world more access to AA than it's ever had before, so I think it's a good thing. My sobriety date is March the 27th, 1985. I don't know about you, but I am very impressed by that. I think that's officially a long time. In another week or so, if I'm a good boy, I'll be 38 years sober, and I think that's really something. Who knew any of us would be here that long, or any length of time, really? So I've been sober a lot longer than I was drinking and using. I drank and used for about 22, 23 years, something like that, from about 14 or 15 till I was 37. So the sober story to me is a hell of a lot more interesting. And that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit today is what's happened since I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. In a nutshell, I was a surfer and a biker and a tough guy, and I rarely went to the beach. My motorcycle rarely ran. I was afraid to fight, but I looked really good. I had a chrome Nazi helmet for a hat and a primary chain for a belt and black greasy Levi's, big black boots with chains around them. I've got tattoos all over me, but I had a clip-on earring because I didn't want to hurt myself, and my biker nickname was Horny. I have it tattooed on my arm, and it's misspelled. It's Horney, Horney, with an exclamation mark for emphasis. So that's pretty much all you need to know about me, And like most of us, I was just a phony, and I didn't know that. It seemed real at the time, it seemed like that's what was really going on, but I just was a little wannabe gangster, and I was 17. I had a big jacket and a slouch and a sneer and a foul mouth, and was a bad drunk in high school, and I carried a gun. And I'm from the mean streets of Palos Verdes, man. There's no gangs in Palos Verdes. Nobody was looking for me. I was a gang of one. And by the time I was 22 years old, I ended up in a mental institution. So it was a short party. Like for most of us, you don't need any other proof that alcoholism is physiological than that last, say, 3 to 5 years that you and I were out there. No one would consciously do that to themselves if they had any say in the matter. There's no party. There hadn't been a party for a long time in my life. And so what happened to me, I had gotten married like at 18 years old, met her. We went to Oregon, and I had a couple of kids, and I'm running with this outlaw motorcycle gang and sticking needles in my arm and drinking like a fish and not coming home to that family, a wife and 2 little kids, and they were on welfare, and it was awful. It was awful. And at 22, I'm in this mental institution, and I came back down to California, and my sober dad, who got sober in 1954 in Alcoholics Anonymous, when he died in 99, he was 45 years sober. So I grew up in an AA house, and my sober dad let me sleep in his garage, and he gave me a little job in his machine shop, in his little machine shop in El Segundo, California, and I tried to clean up my act. And what that looked like is I met another woman, because I'm a high maintenance dude, man. It takes a village to get me through life. I just don't, some things never change. I'm still very high maintenance. I require a lot of attention and care and mothering and stuff, it's like, and there's volunteers out there that'll take us on, huh? And I met her, and we set up housekeeping and tried to make a life for ourselves, And at 37 years old, I'm living in the house with this second wife and a second set of 2 kids. My daughter was 3 years old, and my little son was 4 months old. And I lived in the house with these people, and I had no emotional connection to another living human being. And I don't know that, right? We don't know that. I don't know that I'm not able to connect with you. I've never been connected to you, so I don't know what it feels like to be connected. The alcoholic life seems like the only normal one. I'm in that house, but I am not connected to you. The only time I'm concerned about how you feel is when how you feel impacts me. I don't have any empathy. I never learned it. It never happened for me. I started drinking at a fairly young age, and all through all the period when all the lessons are being handed out, I'm medicated, right? So at 37 years old, I'm not connected. I mean, I do not get along. I'm physically very ill. I don't know how ill I am. I had hepatitis C, and then they didn't even call it that. They called it non-A, non-B. And I had cirrhosis, but I had no idea how bad the cirrhosis was. You know, I was just very ill. And one morning, I'm up all night, right? Just another night. There's no party. There's nobody coming to my house knocking on the door saying, "Can Billy come out and play?" You know, I'm alone, up all night one more time. And I don't know about you, if you remember this, but when the sun comes up, how depressing that is. I don't want the sun to come up. I'm a vampire at this point. I don't want, when the sun comes up, that's depressing to me because it's going to be another miserable day in a long, long line of miserable days. And I'm sitting in my alcoholic chair, drinking the last bit of alcohol that's in the house. And my little daughter wakes up. She's 3 years old, right? She comes out in the living room and she's happy to see that dad's up early in the morning. She's pleased, you know, she climbs up in my lap, and it just broke my heart. It just broke my heart. Sometimes kids can cut through that fog, you know? And I believe, I mean, memories are vague, but I believe what was happening is I realized then I'm not a father, I'm not a husband, I'm a nothing. I'm a nothing. And it just broke my heart. So, like any good gangster, I called my mom. And this is a woman that had been in Al Anon for 30 years by this time. And they're organized, prepared, and focused. And she got there inside of a half an hour before I took the nap and changed my mind. And she loaded me in the car and she drove me to a place in Costa Mesa called Starting Point. And I spent 35 days in this place. And while I was in that place for 35 days, they made me wear a sign around my neck. I had to make the sign. We made it in crafts. It was a little rectangular piece of cardboard with a string that went through it, and it said, "I am not a counselor." Because evidently there was some confusion about that. And then after 35 days, they let me out. They just let us out, don't they? Like we're okay. You know, go forth, multiply. You know, it's like, and where do we end up? Here, in the Lunch Bunch group, Alcoholics Anonymous, the world's aftercare program, right? When all the insurance money runs out and they're all done gestalting and rolfing and primal screaming and, you know, relaxation therapy and equine therapy and all the stuff they do to us, you know, we end up here. We are the counselors, aren't we? You know, you stop and think about this. I've been married 3 times. I've been to a lockdown mental institution with barbed wire on top of the fence twice. And people ask me for relationship advice. I give it to them. I figure, hell, you can't hurt them. They're in AA, you know. Did you know that there's no referrals from Alcoholics Anonymous? There's no place you go where you walk in and you say, "I'm from AA. They sent me here." That place literally doesn't exist. This is it. This is where we end up. Metal folding chairs and linoleum floors for the rest of our natural lives, you know, or Zoom. Sitting in our office somewhere in the kitchen, going to AA meetings. This is it. This is where we end up. Just before the pandemic, the last place I traveled before they shut the whole world down, I flew from LA up to Sonoma to do a men's banquet up there, to speak at a men's banquet. And this guy picks me up at the airport, and he's my age. He's around my age, you know, and you could tell he'd been around AA a long time. Real relaxed, comfortable guy, very nice man. And we're in the car driving out to this place, and he asked me how long I'd been sober, and I told him. And he said to me, "Well, I almost had 30 years. So you knew it was going to be an interesting conversation, right?" And he tells me the story of being in AA for a long time, met his wife in AA. They've been married a long time. He's coming up on retirement. Life is good. Life is good. He's been sober, you know, almost 30 years. And he was coasting. He was resting on his laurels, on these things called laurels, because it says in our book in the 10th step that the only thing that's going to save us and give us a life maybe with some purpose and some intimacy and all the stuff that we're talking about is the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So evidently, I need to get a spiritual condition so I can maintain it. My first job in AA now that I'm here, because I don't have a spiritual condition. I need to get one of those so I can figure out how to maintain it. It also says that we're going to rest on our laurels. So evidently, I need to get some laurels so I can rest on them and find out why that's not such a good idea, because I don't have any laurels. And what's a laurel? A laurel is a past achievement. I didn't have any past achievements. So I need to get some past achievements so I can rest on them and find out why that's not a good idea. That seems to be the goal here, right? To create some kind of spiritual condition. It's got some laurels in it, so I can work on the maintenance of that and find out what that's all about. So this guy tells me the story about he's resting on his laurels. He's just coasting, he's going to some meetings, hanging out with his buddies. Life is, he hasn't drifted away completely, but he had a little surgery and they gave him some pain medication. And on a given day, he took an extra pill. And then pretty soon he's drinking. This is not an uncommon story in Alcoholics Anonymous. These are some of the pitfalls that we face. At the time that he's telling me this story, he's a couple of years sober again, and he's got a commitment. He's driving the speaker around. He's really happy to be back in AA. He didn't lose everything, but it got pretty nasty, right? That night I had dinner, and we sat at the same table together, and we talked further about it. And this really got my attention. I came back to Los Angeles, and it was like listening to myself. This guy was me, right? And I called my sponsor, and I've had the same sponsor for almost 38 years. I should have fired him several times, but he needs me now, right? And he's actually staying here with me right now in the house. And I called my sponsor. I said, Jay, how come you and I are still here? Why are we still here? And he didn't say to me like, well, because we've worked the steps correctly, or we're above average intelligence, or we're more of service, and we've done a lot of. He didn't say that. You know what he said? He said, Bill, you and I have never lost our enthusiasm for it. And I'm 38 years sober, almost 30. I'm pretty sure I'm going to make it here. A few more days. It looks pretty good, pretty promising. And I have never lost my enthusiasm for this. I've been mistreated around here. I don't get the respect I deserve on a regular basis. I've had my ups and downs. Life has happened to me, but I've never drifted away from AA, and I've never lost my enthusiasm for it. And I can tell you, I'm an old hippie from the 60s, and weird has always attracted me. And I find you all deliciously strange. I've never been bored in AA. I've been mistreated a lot, but I've never been bored. And if you're sitting out there today and you're bored, it's because you're boring. It's not us. It's not AA. It's hard to get bored around here unless all you're doing is going to meetings. That can get boring after a while. But even then, the stories, you always hear something new. Even then, if that's all you're doing, even then it can be intriguing. And I've never lost my enthusiasm. I think that's interesting. I feel very grateful about that. It isn't anything special I've done. But they let me out of that recovery place, and I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and two things happened to me that I think are just pure luck. Two things. The first one's probably the most important. I'm setting my clock here. I walked into this meeting in Hermosa Beach Alano Club in Hermosa Beach, California on a Friday night. They let me out on a Friday, and I got home and I went to a meeting because I just knew I was going to drink again. And I really didn't want to. I was pretty pooped, and I really didn't want to. And I was a little bit frightened, which is a good thing to have. A little fear is good for the soul. And I walked up to this Alano Club on a Friday night in April of '85, and it was a kind of a nice spring summery night, and who knew that the meeting would be full on a Friday night? Who knew an AA meeting would be full? All the Harleys were parked out front, which was intriguing. I hadn't expected that. And the room was packed. It was Friday night at the Alano Club. People are dressed up trying to hook up. It's a party. The name of the meeting was called the Gong Show. A lot of people said it wasn't really an AA meeting. I went to it for 20 years. It's like, I walked in there and I stood in the back of the room and I didn't feel part of because I wasn't. I didn't know anybody. And people are hooting and hollering. Nicknames are flying around. Their friends would get up to the podium to share and they'd start hooting and hollering. One guy got up there and they hooted so much he just sat back down. Couldn't even get anything out. It was a party. And I got the joke right away. I started laughing right away. That's how you catch alcoholism. If you get the humor around here, because we laugh at the tragedies and we cry at the successes. It's not like the Rotary Club. They don't do that at the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or something. This is a special kind of humor. It's a dark humor. And I got it right away. I started laughing. And I drove home that night and I said to myself, this may not be so bad. I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting a party. And that's what I walked into. And I got intrigued. I just liked it right away. Not everybody's story, but I just liked it. I felt awkward. I felt weird. I felt strange. But the next night I went back just to find out what the hell's going on there. What is this? The second thing that happened to me is after a couple of weeks of banging around going to meetings at the Alano Club, and I didn't know there were meetings anywhere else. You know, I didn't know anything about AA really. This wasn't my father's AA. It wasn't what I remember back in the 50s when I was growing up. This time I was there for me, right? But the second lucky thing happened is I asked this guy to help me, and he actually did, which doesn't always happen. That first night when I cornered him outside the Alano Club and I asked for help, which is a hard thing to do. What I've learned now is that it's up to us to reach out to them. They can't reach out to us. I'm an extrovert. You know, not everybody's like me that's an extrovert. I could walk up to somebody, but it was difficult for me. I was awkward. It was an awkward thing. How many times in your life have you walked up to somebody and asked them for help? It's not a common thing to do. And he said to me, he says, go home and read the doctor's opinion. Make notes in the margin of what you agree with and what you don't. Be at my house Thursday at 5 o'clock and we'll discuss it. And I think what the bottom is that we reach around here is the collapse of the ego, isn't it? The alibi system falls apart just for a while because it comes back. You know, just for it, the door is opened, right? And I just did what he told me, which was not my MO. That's not how I behave. I just did what he told me. We had a little conversation that night, but I remember he just telling me that. And I went home and I read the doctor's opinion. And I made some notes in the margin. And I showed up at this stranger's house. I don't think I knew his last name then. And I knocked on the door and he let me in and he did an intimate thing with me. He sat me down in his living room, just the two of us. Nobody else was around. And he didn't trust me that I'd read the book and he had me sit there and read it to him out loud. Now, subsequently with this man, I have traveled a good part of the world with this man, and we've done workshops and retreats and spoke places. And we did these, for years, we did these sponsorship workshops where you talk about sponsorship and how it works. Rule number one when you're sponsoring people, make sure they read the book. Don't trust them that they'd read it. Read it with them. It'll probably help you out. If I have to read War Fever Ran High in That New England Town one more time, I don't know. And now I'm doing it on Zoom. Not much has changed. I picked up a few tricks over the years. I think I've gotten a little better at it. You know, of course, you know, just through experience, but I'm still doing that. I read a page, you read a page. I read a page, you read a page. And whatever conversation needs to come up between the two of us sharing our lives together will come up in that environment. I'll bring things to your attention. You'll bring things to my attention. When two people come together, not just one is helped. I was under the misimpression for years that I was the teacher and you're the student. And the truth is, you've always been the teacher. You know, whenever I ask for help, he sends me you. You know, you bring things to the table. You have life experience. You ask me questions. People say in these workshops, what if they ask me something and I don't know the answer? I just tell them, make shit up. They don't know. You know, go find the answer and fix it later, man. It's on the job training. You know, it's on the job training. And there's a lot of wisdom in Alcoholics Anonymous, and everybody, all of us has some wisdom, because what wisdom is life experience. Number one, It's experience. And we have that. We have a lot of really dramatic life experience. Even when we're new in AA, we don't have a lot of sober experience, but we have a lot of shit-faced experience. We've gone through some stuff, man. And what wisdom is that life experience combined with enough intellect to be able to express, to tell the story. And we are a society of storytellers. Some of us, like me, do it in front of bunches of people. But all of us sit one-on-one with each other and tell our stories. Isn't that what happens here? And the thing that's different about Alcoholics Anonymous is we're not telling people what to do. Sometimes we have slips and we do that. But essentially, we tell people what we've done. That's the difference. That's the identification. Somebody sits down and tells me their sad story, right? Then I tell them mine. And there's a connection that happens. You know, I have a sad story. You know, don't you have a sad story? All our stories are sad. We wrecked up our lives. We fucked up our lives. We've made mistakes. I wasted 20 years of my life being hammered. And it took me years in AA to get over the remorse of that. To realize that my greatest weakness has become truly my greatest strength. You know, that story, that 20-year story, that devastated families and abused children and just the nightmare of my life is what you identify with when you come to me. We make an immediate connection that doesn't happen many other places. It's the tragedy of our lives that has drawn us together. So each week I went to this man's house and we read another chapter in the book, and he talked to me and he told me some stuff. He brought some things to my attention, and I asked him questions. You know, we talked, we had conversations. One of the things he said to me that has held true for me, I really believe this. He said, my job as your sponsor is to guide you through the process of the 12 steps, that you might have some kind of spiritual awakening, and maybe you'll never ever drink again the rest of your life. That happens here. He says, but I'd be happy to sit here and listen to you tell me what you think your problems are, so that you will not share about them in the meetings. The meetings are for recovery from alcoholism, not about how your day went. And I said to him, I said, down at the Alano Club, they are breaking that rule right and left. Should we go tell them? And he laughed. He says, no. He says, AA is a safe place. You can pretty much do anything there. They can't really kick you out. He says, I'm just describing to you my Alcoholics Anonymous. So I had another lucky thing. I ran into somebody that hasn't believed this thing that we don't give advice or express opinions. I don't know where the hell that came from, because if we didn't do those two things, we wouldn't have much to say to each other. And I'm a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need some good advice. I don't get along well. They've taken away my medication, and I do not get along well. The impact of your personality on me is devastating. I cannot do you. I have rage. I'm upset. Everybody's talking behind my back. Everything's personal. I'm the guy that walks in the room, and if you're looking at me, it's what the hell are you looking at? And if you're not looking at me, I'm heartbroken. And there's no middle ground. There's not levels of emotional development here. The switch is either on or off, right? People say to you that feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are. That's bullshit, isn't it? Sometimes the way I feel is just incorrect. I have misread the situation. I have an emotional response, and everybody's looking at me like, what's wrong with Bill? You know, guy stepped on his foot, and he just gunned him down in the parking lot. You know, I mean, what is going on? All my reactions are overreactions. I don't think there's such a thing as alcoholic thinking. People talk about that. Well, I'm an alcoholic, you know, I'm about alcoholic thinking, and it's never going away. We are emotionally immature. That's our problem. The professional community says about us, Tebow called us king baby. And they say that we're emotionally, and we hear that and go, no, I have special thinking. I have alcoholic thinking, and it's never going away. And you need to consider that when you're dealing with me. I just didn't grow up. I'm 37 years old in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've got the emotional development of a very disturbed 16-year-old, you know, with a real problem with authority, right? And doesn't know what to do. He doesn't channel things, you know. I mean, I'm in trouble, and here I am with you, right? So this spiritual awakening here, this whole idea of developing some sort of a spiritual condition. What's that about? At the beginning of the pandemic, I started thinking about this, do I have a spiritual condition and what's it made up of? Well, the very first thing this man that let me into his living room wanted to know from me is whether I thought I was powerless over drugs and alcohol. Now, for me, that was a pretty easy answer. I was beat up. I mean, 6 years ago in sobriety, I had a liver transplant. I almost died. 30 years sober. I became very close to death. If I hadn't have got sober in 85, I'd have been dead decades ago. I had no idea how sick I was. And it caught up to me in sobriety. I went through the interferon treatment and all that, and then the liver just failed. I mean, it was just saved my life 6 years ago, February. So I could say, yes, I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. I was pretty beat up. 38 years later, I think it's everything, don't you? I think the very first pillar of spiritual condition is powerlessness. This whole idea of powerless, lack of power is not my dilemma. My real dilemma is I think I have power. The way I live my life is I believe that things outside myself need to be different in order for me to be okay. And they don't change, and I suffer. I talk to you incessantly about how if you were just a little bit different, the two of us would be a hell of a lot happier. And you absolutely insist upon living your own life, and it pisses me off at my core. This is called resentment, drunk or sober. This is called resentment. I've lost complete control over the geopolitical situation in the world. Look at it. It's a mess. 3 years ago, I shut off the TV news. I was not emotionally stable enough to deal with it. Doesn't matter which side you're on. It's crazy. And I don't.
Well, I suspect his power. He got a notice that said they're going to be digging in his neighborhood, and at 9:30 his time, 12:30 our time, the powers could be pulled, and I suspect that's what happened.